Hello, everyone. In this lecture, I will cover chapter 1 of the textbook, which deals with or provides an overview of IT projects and project management. Keep in mind that my lectures are intended to supplement and complement the material that you have in the textbook based on my own experience. As such, make sure that you read the textbook, preferably before you listen to lecture, so that you gain a complete understanding of the concepts that we discuss. Our learning objectives for this chapter is to understand why we consider IT projects as organizational investments, and the fact that these IT projects bring about organizational change, and why should we ensure that IT projects are aligned with the organization's business strategy. We also talk about the definition of projects and the attributes of projects and the discipline of project management. We also differentiate between projects, project portfolios, and programs. And lastly, we look at the current state of IT project management and try to explain why is it that so many projects, IT projects, fail, and how can we improve the likelihood of their success. So let's start by talking about the notion that IT projects are in fact organizational investments. Any project, IT project that you have, it involves time and money and other resources from the organization to accomplish the objectives for that project. The resources that we provide from the organization to IT projects could be people, could be the technology, could be infrastructure, and or facilities. In return, when organizations undertake IT projects, they would expect a return on that investment, on the investment that they are making on the IT project. IT projects have many different purposes, and they range from enabling to integrate the technology into new products or maybe new services or the new processes that the organization is putting in place. And they also range, there's a wide range of projects such as EHR, telemedicine, also increasingly the application of artificial intelligence in the field of medicine is becoming more and more common. So there is an organization, an international organization called Project Management Institute, PMI, and PMI is probably the most recognized authority in the field of project management throughout the world. And PMI publishes a book that is called Project Management Body of Knowledge, PMBOK. And we are going to be referencing PMBOK, and most project management discussions do reference PMBOK. So let's start by looking at how PMBOK defines projects. It defines that a project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. So a couple of points to be made is that one is that projects by nature, they're temporary. They don't go on forever. They need to have a start and a finish. And it has to be very clear every time we start a project, what is the purpose of that project? Is it to provide a unique product, a service, or what impact do we expect that project to have on the business? A project is managed by a project manager, and a project manager is a person who's assigned by the organization to achieve the project objectives and deliver the outcomes that is expected from the project. Now let's look at some of the attributes of projects. As we just discussed, projects are temporary endeavors, meaning that they have to have a start date and an end date. In some cases, our end date may be fixed, meaning that we have to deliver a project by certain date because of some, say, regulations that are going into effect at certain time. So in those cases, we basically work our way backwards and figure out what start date we need and what level of resources we need to be able to finish by that end date. All projects need to have a purpose, and they have a purpose. Their purpose should be to bring value to the organization. This can be in the form of offering a new service or a new product. Projects, we talked about the fact that they are investments from the organization. The organization time, money, staff, facilities, their infrastructure, the technology is being or is made available to the IT project. All projects have risk. Some have more risk than others. For example, if you're trying a new technology, that IT project has significantly more risk associated with that. But regardless, all projects have risks, and especially at the beginning when we start the project, there are a lot more uncertainties. For example, we may not know the exact cost of the labor that we are going to need. So in many cases, we have to make some assumptions to be able to plan the project. Obviously, those assumptions need to be made as educated as possible by researching and making sure that we are making the right assumptions. So when we look at projects and when we plan projects, we identify tasks that need to be accomplished to finish that project, and project tasks are most of them are interdependent, meaning that one task is impacted by other tasks, and there's this notion or this process of progressive elaboration as we work with on projects. We keep uncovering various aspects of the project, and we are able to better define the project. As an example, when we start a project, we may have a general notion of what capabilities we need, but as we progressively elaborate on the project, we come up with more specific specifications for the projects and requirements for the project. As projects introduce new products or services, we need to make sure that the organization is ready to take advantage of those new products and services, and whatever changes that we need to make in the organization in terms of processes that we may need to change to take advantage of that new system. We have to be aware that those organizational changes are part and parcel of the success of the project, because if we don't plan for those, if we don't properly train the staff to use the new system or change the processes in the organization to use the system, then the product is not going to be as successful, and the project as a whole will not be as successful because it doesn't deliver that business value to the organization. And lastly, we have to remember that projects are carried out within an organization, and as such, they're impacted by the organizational environment. Meaning the culture, the politics, and the structure of the organization. All of those are factors that impact how we execute projects. For example, if we have a very conservative organization, we may need to include more cost and schedule contingencies so that we never exceed the budget or the schedule of the project. As we look at projects, there are a number of roles that are played by various people. One of the most important roles is project sponsor. This is the high-level business person who had justified the project to the funding authorities within the organization to gain the resources that are needed for the project based on the justification of the benefits that that project brings to the organization. So that person, the project sponsor, is essentially on the hook to deliver the business results for the project. Another important role is the project manager. This is the person who's responsible for all the project deliverables to make sure that everything that is promised will be delivered within the budget and the schedule that is requested and given to the project. From time to time, or in many cases, we need subject matter experts. These are the folks who have expertise and insights of the business where we are implementing the project. These could be physicians, nurses in a healthcare organization, and these are typically selected from people who will eventually be using the system in the business. Technical experts are typically used by projects on when they need them, so they're not typically 100% on the project throughout the project, and they can bring different technical expertise such as database expertise or networking and or cybersecurity expertise. Another term that we need to be familiar with is stakeholders. This includes all the people, groups, or other organizations, even outside organizations, that may have vested interest in the success or failure of the project. One of the typical stakeholders for IT projects that uses a technology from outside the organization is the vendor who's providing the software or the package that is being implemented. Project management is the discipline of application of knowledge, skills, the tools and techniques that we have to apply to a project in order for it to meet the project objectives. So we talked about individual projects, but we need to be familiar with a couple other terms. Project portfolio is a collection of diverse projects that are managed to collectively support an organization strategy. For example, when I was leading the projects for probation and pretrial services in U.S. courts, we had a collection or portfolio of projects for probation and pretrial services. We had a budget about, I think about $12 million at the time, and we would come up with a number of projects that would support a probation and pretrial services strategy. Programs, on the other hand, is a collection of projects within a project portfolio that are focused on a particular benefit to offer to the organization. For example, in probation, we had a number of projects that were intended to support the mobility of our workforce. And our workforce were some 5,000 probation and pretrial services officers throughout the country and 3,000 support staff that they were supporting them. So that would be mobile computing was the program, and it had many projects within that program that they all supported the mobility of our officers. When we look at the history of information technology and how it has evolved over the years from the first computer that came about in 1940s to mainframe computers that were essentially very large equipment that required dedicated air conditioning and very huge machines. And that's when the first in the area of healthcare, that's when large healthcare organizations and hospitals start considering using these mainframes for their administrative tasks such as finance and so forth. And the same as computers evolved and personal computers came about, then it became possible to provide or to use PCs for managing practices within a healthcare organization. Over time, beyond the PCs, the next big thing was networking era. This is when all the personal computers could be connected and become a network and talk to each other, and eventually, of course, this evolved into also the internet. And in late 1990s, early 2000, that's when the electronic health record system came about that went beyond the administrative tasks within healthcare, but looking at the information that is needed for patient care. It's hard to believe that it's only 14 years ago that iPhone was invented, and it was 2007, and of course that's when it was one of the biggest milestones in handheld devices, and having the handheld devices and smartphones in early 2010 decade, in 2011, 12, and so forth. That's when a number of applications or apps came up that basically disrupted many industries, many businesses. As an example of that is Lyft app that came about, and of course it impacted the taxi and rental or hired car business significantly. In the healthcare environment, the later developments were further enhancements and ability of systems to provide e-prescription, to send it to the pharmacies, and of course in the recent years, especially because of the pandemic, it pushed the telehealth to a new level, and it's used much more widely these days. So now we have defined IT projects and project management. How good is the state of IT project management? That's a question that the Standish Group has been looking at, and they have been publishing reports for a number of years. If you have listened to my immigrant story and my professional background, you know that for a period of time I also work in management consulting, and specifically focusing on benchmarking projects and IT projects. And basically in any of these studies you have to establish what does success mean for a project, and in general success is defined as completing the project within the scope, within the budget, within the time and schedule that you establish, and you deliver all the features that were envisioned for the project. Both the Standish Group report and my experience and our observation when I was with Independent Project Analysis was that generally more projects fail or are challenged than projects that are successful. Again, failing would be defined as if a project significantly falls short on any or a number of those outcomes, like schedule, time, and the capabilities that was promised. The challenge projects are the ones that they fall short, at least in one of those areas. So the bottom line is that many projects fail or are challenged than those that succeed. So this is obviously troubling, because as we said, projects are investments, and that means that many of these investments are failing. So let's look at some of the underlying reasons. Actually, just before we look at the underlying reasons, these are the numbers. So successful projects, only 1 out of 6 projects met all of their outcomes, the promised outcomes, cost, schedule, and the functionality that they promised. 53% of them, or more than half, were challenged, meaning these projects missed one of at least one of the targets that they have. And 31%, almost a third of all projects were canceled, meaning that you made an investment and at some point you decided that it makes no longer sense to pursue this project. When I was with US Course, one of the first tasks that the director of the administrative office of US Course asked me to do was to look at a project that we had invested at the time $12 million and decide if we should pursue that project. And after looking at all the aspects of the project and the technology that they had decided to use um, and the effort that they had put up to that point, I made the determination and I made the recommendation that it does not make sense to continue with that project. So that was one of the projects that we ended up canceling. So this is obviously a very painful decision for any organization to cancel a project, to cancel basically the or write off the investment that you have made on those projects. But when you look at the whys of projects fail, you can actually group the reasons of why they fail into 4 different categories. It could be because of the people, maybe the various players in the project did not play their role or carry out their responsibilities accurately. It could be the processes, the way they approach the project management, they approach the product management. In the particular example I just shared with you, one of the main reasons for the failure for that project was that they had a very long requirements gathering process without actually putting any part of the system in place. And that was one of the causes of the failure. The other cause was actually the technology that project had used. It turned out that it was not a proven technology and they didn't have the proper skill set to use it either. But projects also could fail because of the organizational setup. Maybe there is not a clear direction for the project. Maybe the business environment is changing or the customer needs are changing. All of these could contribute to or could be the source of the project failure. So when they look at the reasons for project failures in the chaos report, the Standish group found that when you look at the causes that are related to people, some of the top contributing factors of lack of top management support, this is a big deal, meaning that if an IT project doesn't have a strong sponsorship by the leadership in the organization, it is very likely that it would fail. Similarly, if the users, the end users, are not involved in the planning and rolling out of the project, again, that can be a big contributing factor. Other contributing factor in terms of the processes, when the objectives and goals are not well laid out, when there's not enough planning done for the project. This poor planning was actually one of the areas that we were able when I was working at independent project analysis, we were able to statistically show the impact of poor planning on project outcomes, and it is significant. Technology, we already talked about that unproven or new technology inherently carry more risk, and they can cause the projects to fail. And organizational related issues such as lack of direction or changing direction or changing priorities, those are also very high contributing factors to project failures. So kind of rank ordering all of the success criteria for a project. This is the results from the chaos report, and you can see that the user involvement ranks very highly. Executive management support, another big item. Clear statement of requirements, what it is that we need to build, is an important factor. Proper planning, realistic expectations, making sure that the project is not based on unrealistic targets, like very aggressive schedules or aggressive costs. Smaller project milestones, this is big also. In fact, that this issue was a problem in the project I mentioned to you that I looked at in US courts, and finally we made the recommendation to stop funding that project, and we did. And the reason for that, they did not have smaller milestones. They went for the big system to be put in place in one shot, and that's why the project went on for a long time and spent a lot of money, and they didn't have much to show for. Competent staff and so on are other factors, as you can see on this table. So what do we do to improve the likelihood of success of a project? A project has to be value driven, meaning that the project has to have very clear value offering to the organization. The socio-technical approach around the project, meaning that the involvement of the stakeholders, and particularly the business side stakeholders. So if we are implementing a system in a healthcare organization, the involvement of nurses and physicians and the support staff, it's very important to have them involved with the project from the get-go. The other part that impacts the success of the project is the project management approach. Do we have a methodology that lays out what needs to be done on a project and making sure that all the proper stakes are taken? Making sure that we have enough resources in terms of the budget and the staffing level that the project requires. Do we have realistic expectations in terms of the quality and cost? And these are some of the elements that we need to make sure, looking at the internal IT capabilities in an organization versus outsourcing the project. All of these are contributing to the success of the project. And as an organization, one of the other factors that helps all projects is making sure that we capture lessons learned and best practices from successful projects. And unsuccessful projects, there are many lessons to be learned from unsuccessful projects. Make sure we capture those and we share those those learnings with the other project. So this whole concept of knowledge management is also extremely important in improving the likelihood of success for projects in an organization.